Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this press briefing. Sorry for the slight delay. This briefing is on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory by special procedures mandate holders. We'll have 4 special rapporteurs briefing today, so let me introduce them all quickly and so we can get started. On the podium today we have Francesca Albanese, Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. Next to Ms. Albanese on the podium is Ms. Irene Khan, the Special Rapporteur on freedom of opinion and expression. And online with us today is Mary Lawler, who is a Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. And last but certainly not least is Mr. George Katrougalos, the independent expert on international order. Each of the speakers today will have brief opening remarks, and then they'll take your questions. We will begin with opening remarks by Ms. Albanese. Special Rapporteur, you have the floor.
Thank you all, and good afternoon. It's a painful honor to be here at such a critical moment for Gaza and for the Palestinians as a whole. 710. This is the number of days of absolute horror that the people in Gaza have endured. 65,000 is the number of Palestinians ascertained killed, including of which 75% are women and children. In fact, we shall start thinking of 680,000 because this is the number that some scholars and scientists claim being the real death toll in Gaza, and it would be hard to be able to prove or disprove this number, especially if investigators and others remain banned from entering the occupied Palestinian territory, and particularly the Gaza Strip. But if this number is confirmed, 380,000 of these are infants under 5. 1,581, this is the number of health workers killed in Gaza. 252 is the number of the journalists, your colleagues, killed in Gaza. And 346 is the number of UN staff killed in Gaza. 10,000 Palestinians have been detained, mostly arbitrarily, by an unlawful occupation, which has been starving, torturing, and even raping inmates, including doctors and patients. 75 is the numbers of detainees who have been reported killed in Israeli custody just in the last 710 days. Images of scores of Palestinians taken from their homes, shackled and blindfolded in the middle of the night continues to reach us from the occupied Palestinian territory. Homes, shelters, hospitals, schools, mosques continue to be destroyed. Over 85% of Gaza lies in ruin. The ongoing assault to take the last remnant of Gaza, meaning Gaza City, will not only devastate the Palestinians, but endangers also the remaining Israeli hostages, putting their life in great danger. Meanwhile, the West Bank is not having a much better present. The situation is unraveling under intensified oppression. Over 1,000 Palestinians, including 212 children, have been killed in the last 710 days. 1,600 is the number of the raids, with a 22% increase compared to the previous years over Palestinian inhabited areas. And so the numbers of targeted killing is also going up, which is the most severe since the Second Intifada, with the full destruction of refugee camps, and 40,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced. In all this, our annexation continues unabated, with family entering multiple times of cycles of the displacement, facing the expansion of settlements and outposts. No space is safe for Palestinians, but no space is safe for international law under this brutal occupation. And behind every statistic is a human life, a story cut short, a family broken. The trauma and grief will last generations. Meanwhile, far too many states continue to look away, normalize the suffering, and they even profit from it. Arms, trade and diplomatic engagement with Israel continue unabated, and this is not just morally wrong, this is unlawful. As I argued in my last report to the Human Rights Council, this genocide has become profitable, unfortunately, not just for some corrupt private entities. And this is not only Israel's crimes, this is a world's crime sustained by silence, complicity and the supply of funds, weapons and political cover. History will remember, because it's not that this is the first genocide that is been known. No, the Holocaust, the genocide in Bosnia, the genocide in Rwanda were also known to the people of the time. But this genocide happened because the world didn't care enough to stop them, like today, or not. But today's genocide has something different. It's openly incited, cynically denied, and relentlessly supported, armed and weaponized, while those who oppose it are silenced, beaten, criminalized and smeared. This is why I say this is the shame of our time, and the collapse of the international legal order lays in this moment, not only for the Palestinians but for all of us. So I asked prime ministers, presidents, foreign ministers, so-called world leaders, how do you sleep? When will you act, truly act beyond the words? But I also see courage. Dock workers, trade unions, students, mothers and fathers, ordinary people everywhere are refusing this complicity. And their message is clear. No more genocide, no more apartheid, starting in Palestine. The future millions demand is one of justice, equality and freedom, and is still within reach if we act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Albanese. Our next speaker will be the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. Ms. Khan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I will just say a few words to complement what Francesca Albanese has said, and I will, of course, focus on the issue of my own mandate, freedom of expression. Gaza has become the deadliest conflict ever for journalists. More journalists have been killed in Gaza than in both world wars, Vietnam War, wars in Yugoslavia, and the war in Afghanistan combined, according to one research institute. As Francesca mentioned, the UN number right now is 252, but that is, of course, likely to go up because every week we hear news of more killings. In August alone, 9 journalists were killed in 3 horrific, bloody incidents, as you may remember. Many of these 252 journalists have been targeted, by which we mean deliberately picked out and killed because of the work that they are doing to expose the atrocities, the crimes, the genocide on the ground. Let me spend 1 minute on the strategy that Israel seems to have developed, where they will first delegitimize and discredit a journalist. Smear campaigns are started, accusing the journalists of being terrorist supporters or terrorists themselves, and then they are killed. So it is not just killing journalists, but the attempt is being very clearly made here to kill the story, because journalists, local journalists in Gaza today, are carrying the brunt of that killing spree, because they are the only ones who are there. Gaza, what is happening in Gaza is extremely unusual in that I cannot recall another situation where a member state of the United Nations has denied access to independent international media for a conflict, for atrocities, for the unfolding of genocide, and now genocide actually happening over almost 3 years at this stage. We have not seen in any other country a situation like that happening, where international media are being denied independent access. The burden then falls on the local journalists who are being picked out, as I mentioned, and killed, labeled as terrorists and killed. Journalism is not terrorism. Journalism is not a crime. journalists are civilians under international humanitarian law and therefore protected like other civilians. However, journalists, because of the nature of their war, have to go where the fighting is. They cannot flee away from the fighting, and they are being then deliberately picked out and killed. International media have been denied access. Al Jazeera has been actually banned from even operating in the West Bank or in Israel itself. What we see here, therefore, is, as Francesca Albanese, as you know, has written about the anatomy of genocide and the economy of genocide, and I would say that the story of the way in which journalists are being killed, silenced, killing journalists, murdered, in fact, is the cover-up of genocide, because these local journalists are the main source for news right now from the ground up. And if they can be stopped, if the information that is leaking out to the world can be stopped somehow, the Israeli Defense Forces believe that they can continue to do what they are doing with impunity. And that actually is the critical word here, impunity. Israel has never been held accountable. Israel has never allowed independent investigation of a single killing of a journalist ever in the Palestinian occupied territories. We have cases going back 20 years that have not ever been investigated internationally. And that, of course, has created this environment of permissibility in which the Israeli Defense Forces can do what they want to destroy those who are daring to expose the truth on the ground. And that, to me, is a big tragedy, certainly for the journalists themselves, certainly for the genocide in Gaza, but I think for media freedom around the world. A terrible precedent here is being made, and those countries that champion media freedom, those who speak about independent media, I hold them responsible at this stage. They must bring pressure to bear on Israel to allow independent investigation of the killings, to allow international access to international independent media. The very presence of international independent media will give some degree of protection to local journalists who are out there working alone, and of course, to stop the killing itself. Without journalists, we know that this story will never be complete. The information would be very difficult to get. Already, local journalists are suffering the same conditions like the rest of the population, looking for food, water, shelter. They've had family members killed, and yet they continue. Many of them continue very bravely to report. But how long can that can go on happening? In fact, in my last press release, the title was "States Must Stop Israel Before All Journalists in Gaza Are Silenced." And that is what I fear. I hope very much that you will speak up for those in your own community, journalists in your own professional community. Speak up loud and clear that this must come to an end and Israel must be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. Moving to our speakers online, we'll now hear from Mary Lawler, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Ms. Lawler, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody, for having me here. I would like to focus my remarks on a hearing that I had with 10 human rights defenders from different organizations who are still working in Gaza. I had the hearing about 10 days ago. I'd like to focus on what they bring their voices, in fact, on what they said about daily life, about the risks that they're facing, about the funding situation and what they are calling for. So first on the daily life. They're like everybody else. They're in the same catastrophic situation. They have no homes and they have no offices. And they've always worked. Even when I was in Gaza, you could see they worked under tremendous pressure. But the situation has worsened incredibly. And they've been displaced, as we all know, by the IDF over and over again One woman said she had already moved 5 times, starting with her children every time again. And another woman, human rights defender, said she had been displaced 7 times. And she said, and I quote her, "I myself have been displaced 7 times. Each time I was forced to begin from scratch. My home was demolished. I lacked the basic needs for living. I borrowed all the clothes on my back from my sisters and others, and these are all I have." And they are living in tents and working in tents. And their day, they say, begins by the search for food and water for themselves and for their families. But there's no guarantee that they will find anything. And one of the women human rights defenders on the call, on the online meeting, said that she had had no water that day because there was no water and it was already midday in Gaza. Another woman said, you know, she sets off in the morning and she's so afraid that anything could happen when she's looking for supplies and she won't come back because they have no protection. And she could be killed. And she says, you know, I see my child and my child should be going to school. My child should be playing football. Instead, he's hanging around dead bodies. They are very near the killing of, as Irene was talking about, the killing of journalists, and I regard journalists and medical doctors and health workers as human rights defenders in Gaza. One of them was in the tent where Anas al-Sharif, the journalist, was killed by Israel on the morning of his killing. And their work is tiring and cumbersome and very risky. In order for a lawyer or a researcher to get from point to B, they have to find a donkey if they're lucky, or else walk for hours with Israeli planes and drones overhead, they said. And they are all doing their work hungry or starving. Like everyone else, you can't get food because it isn't there. Instead, there is hunger and malnutrition, and the effects are mental as well as physical. One woman defender told me she no longer recognizes herself in the mirror. She has lost so much weight. And another man defender told me, the words we have are no longer, and I'm quoting him, sufficient to describe the situation. Once people have lived through hunger and starvation, after you, your children and your wife have lived through them, they have a real taste after you have struggled to secure even the basic needs for your loved ones. So moving on to the risks that they are facing on the ground, and as we know, these are extreme. Many have been killed by Israel already, and that is the risk that they face every day. That is what the defenders are talking about when they say they fear to make it home after their day's work. This is targeted killing and random killing, and Israel has absolutely no regard for civilians if they are Palestinian. Mr. Ihab Marwan Kamal Faisal, Ms. Noor Nasser, Abdul Al-Noor and Ms. Dana Yagli, all human rights defenders with the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, were killed by Israel in separate airstrikes in February 24 and January 25. And these are just 3 examples. Mr. Faisal was killed with his wife and 2 daughters, aged 6 and 3. Ms. Abu Al-Noor was killed along with her little 2-year-old daughter, her parents and 4 siblings. And Ms. Yagi was killed along with 37 members of her family. These are horrors, and yet the United States, Germany, the UK and so many other states keep supporting what Israel is doing. And when I spoke with these human rights defenders in Gaza, one of them made it very clear. We are all on death row in Gaza now, they said. They've absolutely no protection. On the funding situation, of course there's not enough funding. Human rights defenders are barely meeting their basic needs if they are being met at all. The sanctions imposed by the US on Palestinian organisations, which are completely baseless, and a clear attempt to stop the defenders doing their work, has made the situation all the more difficult. Al-Mizan, Al-Haq, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Adamir, these groups have been doing essential work for decades. They are being targeted, as they have been for years, because they are building a path to accountability for the crimes Israel has committed against Palestinians. Israel and the United States want to close down the path to justice, and this is why these organisations are being targeted. It's because they are keeping the hope alive that one day justice will be achieved. And all states who claim to uphold human rights must push back against what is being done with them. And there must be more funding, increased funding for defenders on the ground. With more support, they could do more, collect more evidence of what has happened, better document the crimes, and they would contribute to upholding international law, which all states say they support. And finally, just to say what they all, because I asked, each defender on that call was asked the same questions by me, and one of the questions was what they are calling for. And what they said is they are calling for an end to genocide being committed by Israel in front of the eyes of the world. They are calling for an end to the famine Israel has created, to the blockade of Gaza, and they are calling for justice for all victims of human rights violations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lawler. Our next speaker will be the independent expert on international order, Mr. Katrougalos. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to start reading you a short excerpt by a recent article in Haaretz of the renowned Israeli diplomat, minister, historian, Shlomo Ben-Ami. He used to be pivotal also in the Oslo Accords. He writes, Israel, I quote, is committing atrocities that may remain a mark of Cain on the forehead of the Jewish state for years to come. Is it possible that the people who endured the Holocaust are now committing the most heinous of crimes, genocide, against their neighbors? I understand, of course, the question as rhetoric. Already Francesca presented us the hard numbers about the ongoing, online, before the eyes of all the world, genocide in Gaza. The civilian victims, of whose the vast majority, more than 75%, are women and children. Mary and Irene presented us other dimensions of this tragedy. The fate of the freedom of expression, journalism, the fate of the human rights defender. But there is another victim besides the crimes committed in the West Bank, the genocide in Gaza. The international legal order is now being undermined in the Middle East. There is an unraveling pattern of lawlessness by the multiple attacks of Israel against almost all its neighbors and also some of non-neighboring states like Iran and Qatar. The recent attack of Qatar was without precedent exactly because killing members of negotiating teams go against diplomatic patterns that have been founded even in the ancient times, in classical Athens or Rome. By this attack, Israel clearly undermined one of the few credible avenues to prevent further destruction, release the hostages, and open a path to peace. But this goes beyond that. All these attacks have, as I said, the explicit or tacit support of the United States. The impunity that these acts entail, the lack of accountability, the selective application of international law, weaken the credibility of the United Nations, undermine multilateralism and the international post-world order based on the United Nations Charter and the human rights system of law. such actions, it's clear that widen distrust, erode international norms, and encourage impunity. We have heard the European leaders saying that Israel is doing the dirty job for all the West. If we accept this mentality, we create the conditions when further human rights violations in the future are going to become the new normal. We know what we should do. We have the opinion of the International Court of Justice and the related resolution of the General Assembly. These constitute now norms of international law that must be implemented with a first evident step, stop of selling any kind of arms to Israel. Immediate ceasefire. The aid to reach without any hindrance all of Gaza population. And it should be clear that in the future, only Palestinians should rule and administrate Gaza. A Gaza resort without its citizens, it's a dystopian nightmare. And of course, this must be only the first step towards a full sovereign Palestinian state. It is clear that we cannot have peace without justice. And now it is on us, the whole humanity, not just to follow passively in our screens the genocide, but put a stop to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katrougalos. The experts will now take questions. Please state your name and organization before asking. And since we have 4 speakers, I'll also ask you to please indicate to which expert your question is directed. Okay.
Thank you very much to everybody for this briefing. Olivia Lepodova from Reuters. I have 2 questions, if I may, for Ms. Albanese. I just want to understand, just firstly, what brings you to Geneva, and if you've met with anybody in particular today during your time here. I also noted on your travel schedule that you won't be at the UN General Assembly, and I just wanted to clarify if that was related to sanctions placed against you by the US administration. And just secondly, you're mentioning there about your concerns about Gaza City. From your perspective, from an international law perspective as well, are you able to describe what human rights concerns you have in terms of what you're currently seeing in this latest assault by the Israeli military on Gaza City, particularly in terms of destruction of civilian infrastructure, buildings, etc.? Thank you.
It's interesting that the first question you asked me is about my travel schedule, which I'm not going to share. It's true that it's an exceptional visit because I don't often come to Geneva. But as I was coming, I found the time to meet with you all to be asked questions about the situation in Gaza. Concerning the attack on Gaza City, let me first put it in perspective, because I often hear the explanation that Israel is now going to take control of Gaza City. This is what remains, because the majority of the territory is already under Israeli control, direct or indirect, in the sense that there are areas that have been leveled to the ground. There are areas that are started to being built by the army for now. What does it mean, this attack? It means full destruction. It's happening already. It's not that this is a future and uncertain event. It's happening. Israel is bombing is destroying, including by using unconventional weapons that we've never seen before, and newly assembled weapons. Is destroying entire neighborhoods, remnants of buildings where people were seeking shelter, really. It's trying to forcibly evacuate the 800,000 Palestinians who were seeking refuge there. But the question is, why? Why? Because this is the last piece of Gaza that needs to be rendered unlivable before advancing the ethnic cleansing of that piece of land. And then probably they will move to the West Bank. And the important thing is that this is unlawful. Unlawful and unlawful, because the only legal thing that Israel can do in the occupied Palestinian territory is to move out. Dismantling the settlements, withdrawing the troops, and stopping exploiting Palestinian resources are the three of the 5 things that the International Court of Justice has asked Israel to do in the advisory opinion, together with paying reparations for all the harm and damage caused to the Palestinians by Israel, and facilitating the return of those displaced. And this should be the perimeter of the political discussions the member states have to start with, before or in line with also talking about the crimes that Israel is being committing. And in fact, it seems to me that there is an intentional determination to circumvent this by moving the discussion, instead of from where it should be, ending the atrocities, the sources of and the root causes of the illegality in the occupied Palestinian, let's move it somewhere else, where it really we do not have to talk about, I mean, some states are doing that, where we do not have to talk about our responsibilities.
Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy Lance for the French Public Radio. If I may, I will ask my question in French to Ms. Albanese. 2 questions en réalité. La première sur le nombre de victimes. Vous avez évoqué il y a quelques instants un nombre de victimes potentielles très élevé, jusqu'à 10 fois peut-être ce qui est officiellement comptabilisé jusqu'à présent. Je voudrais savoir d'où viennent ces chiffres. Est-ce qu'ils sont crédibles selon vous et que comprennent-ils? Est-ce qu'on parle des victimes directes en plus des victimes liées à l'absence de traitement pour les maladies, la famine, etc. Enfin voilà, d'où viennent vraiment ces chiffres très importants. La deuxième question par rapport à ce qui va venir à la fin du mois, l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU et cette reconnaissance de la part de certains pays de l'État de Palestine. L'administration Trump a déjà dit qu'elle refuserait de donner des visas à des représentants palestiniens. Il y a des appels qui viennent de la part de la société civile, de militants, souvent classés à gauche, qui réclament de délocaliser l'Assemblée générale à Genève pour que ces représentants palestiniens puissent venir, puissent participer. Je voudrais savoir si c'est un appel que vous soutenez, même si la faisabilité semble un peu compliqué, mais est-ce que ce serait pour vous un signe fort que l'Assemblée générale ait lieu à Genève?
Alors, je pars de ce dernier point. Je pense, oui, que c'est le moment de s'interroger pour l'Assemblée générale sur ce qu'on est après 80 ans de l'épilagration des Nations Unies, dans le sens que on peut pas autoriser un membre de l'Assemblée générale et du Conseil de sécurité de ne pas autoriser la participation des gens des États qui font partie ou des organisations qui font partie, des représentants du peuple qui font partie de l'Assemblée générale et d'autres. Et là, on a vu cette année que la liste de ceux-là qui sont formellement persona non grata aux États-Unis commence à s'allonger. Je pense que avant de penser, d'essayer de bouger l'Assemblée générale et tout, que c'est pas une mauvaise idée, c'est-à-dire c'est pas à moi de le dire, mais c'est le moment de aussi considérer que le monde est fait par 193 pays. Et si les États-Unis continuent à montrer cette hostilité, alors je pense qu'il y a de quoi se demander si c'est pas le cas de bouger l'organisation, mais ça me concerne pas. Ce qui me concerne, c'est que je voudrais voir un engagement concret de la part des États afin de garantir qu'il est tout représentant qui a le droit de s'asseoir à cette séance de l'Assemblée générale soit présent, sans discrimination. Et la chose qui est frappante, à mon avis, c'est qu'il y a une fragmentation aussi des forces qui devraient s'unir à défendre ceux-là qui sont punis injustement. Et voilà. Je sais qu'il y a des propositions aussi de tenir la séance de l'Assemblée générale hors de New York. Évidemment, ça n'a pas passé. Les chiffres que j'ai mentionnés, en fait, viennent de différentes sources. Il y a le Lancet, il y a des chercheurs israéliens qui ont aussi posé ce chiffre. Ça vient de différentes sources. En fait, c'est le calcul de ce qui a été détruit à Gaza et la capacité si je comprends bien les statistiques, de contenir. C'est une étude sur combien de gens apparaissent être présents à Gaza, confirmée par contre par des documents relâchés au leaked par l'armée israélienne, mais aussi ce qui pourrait être être causé par les frappes, surtout les frappes c'est-à-dire ces morts à cause des traumas, à cause de destruction de bâtiments et tout ça. Il y a l'opportunité. Est-ce que j'ai la possibilité de vérifier ces chiffres? Pas toute seule, mais bien sûr, ça c'est quelque chose que nous tous on est en train de faire, mais on est vraiment dans l'impossibilité parce que les gens présents à Gaza, les organisations présentes à Gaza sont de moins en moins et Gaza s'est détruite à un point que c'est aussi difficile faire une estimation. Ça va prendre des années pour vérifier, comme ça se passe encore au Rwanda, en Bosnie, de vérifier, de récupérer tous les restes humains de cette catastrophe. Mais c'est-à-dire une chose dont je suis absolument sûre aussi en étudiant la croissance et l'intensité des morts par rapport aux frappes, c'est que depuis longtemps, on a les sources sur place, soit palestiniens, soit non gouvernementales internationales et Nations Unies, n'ont plus la possibilité de compter tous les morts. Alors, les 64 000 qu'on continue à citer sont ceux-là qui ont été vérifiés. Mais c'est clair que c'est une très forte sous-estimation.
My name is Mohamed Al-Fanich. I'm from Alga TV. So, first of all, thank you for your statement. I have two questions, one's for you and one for Irene also. According to our reporter, Alga TV in Gaza, we have some local reporter there today, just till this moment, 41 people being killed in Gaza, 28 in the city of Gaza and north of the Gaza Strip, 12 on the south of the Gaza Strip, and 1 on the middle of the Gaza Strip. So I'm sure by the end of the day, you're going to reach more number. You mentioned a lot in your report, and it was clearly mentioned what's happening in Gaza. But what do you think it should be done? I came from London, and we see daily basis British government said they need ceasefire immediately. European Union also, United Nations. And they're asking Israel to do the ceasefire. Israel is not responding. It's not. So it's any other tools. We can make ceasefire, according to your experience or your own opinion. And my question to Irene, you said the journalism is being scared and the story being killed before even the journalism start. And we know the situation as journalists, when you're working in that kind of field, how you can make the statement, how you can be, either you look after yourself or you tell the truth. And what we can do, or what you can do to protect the journalists in Gaza. Thank you.
As I said, the international law is of extreme clarity when it comes to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. I really don't know what else can be said, because I don't think that member states do not understand. They just don't want to do what we are all, the human rights community, reminding them they should be doing, because there is an obligation not to aid and assist, not to aid and assist in any possible ways a state which is committing international wrongdoing. There are, and this is where we need to go next, when this is persistent, when this lack of compliance with international law becomes widespread and systematic, it results into sustaining, enabling the illegal act. So what should be done? Arms embargo, which means no trade in arms, no buying, no selling parts or arms in full, not directly, not indirectly through another state. This is the first thing that member states should have done already last year when International Court of Justice recognized the risk of genocide, and then, in the case of Nicaragua versus Germany, reminded member states of their obligation not to transfer weapons to a state which might be committing violations of international humanitarian law, meaning war crimes. And it's clear that Israel is, I mean, you can say that really closed eyes that Israel is committing war crimes. How? Because Israel was already committing war crimes before October 7, the colonies, the blockade, etc. So you see, there has been a level of normalization of the legality that Israel has ended up representing. And now it seems that member states almost don't know how to react and do the right thing, come back to a path of compliance with legality. But then there are countermeasures that member states have to take, and the stopping trade is not just for weapons, it's also for regular commercial activities and businesses. This is what happens when a state commits serious crimes, as Israel is doing. And should it not happen, well, there is a need for accountability of the very people who have been giving orders to continue trade and arms transfers toward Israel. The last point is divestment. As I want to remind everyone, as I did with my last report, that we cannot imagine that the business sector, the private sector, from arms manufacturers to tourism industry, banks, pension funds, universities, are allowed to do, are permitted to do what member states shouldn't be doing, meaning aiding and assisting an unlawful endeavor, especially as businesses, by the very fact of interacting with this unlawful endeavor, can be directly linked, contributing to, even causing human rights violations. So this is, again, the human rights standards, international law are very clear. It's clear, equally clear, is that member states tend to violate international law in this context rather than abiding, and so it's time for justiciability. And again, everyone who's partaking in this endeavor must be held accountable, of course, based on the possibilities of also civil society judges and lawyers on the ground.
Yes, you had a question for me. Before I answer your question, let me. Oh, yeah, I think it's all right now. Yes, all right. Yes, I wanted to say that what is the really scary thing about what is happening to journalists in Gaza now is that the killing of journalists is following the pattern of the military strategy of the Israeli Defense Forces. If you look at August, you will see that the killing of Anes al-Sharif took place just as the Israeli army was preparing to invade or re-invade Gaza City. And therefore they killed the team that was there, the journalist team there. So you will see more and more journalists being killed first, and then the army moves in. That is what is happening. Now, that is totally against anything that has ever been written in international humanitarian law about the protection of media in war times. Destruction of the equipment, killing of journalists. Now, this is premeditated killing of journalists. In a non-war situation, it would be plain murder. In a war situation, it is actually a war crime. What can be done about it? I think Francesca has already mentioned about sanctions that member states can put on Israel for committing or as a deterrent against war crimes, arms embargo being an obvious one. But I think international community, member states, the media, champions of media freedom, need to put the safety of journalists in Gaza much, much higher on their agenda than they are doing now. You said you come from London. Keir Starmer met with the President of Israel, I believe, earlier this week. Did he talk about the killing of journalists? Did he raise that with the President of Israel in terms of accountability, independent investigations? Did he demand that the BBC and other independent media, international media outlets be allowed into Gaza? Those are the issues that need to be put very high on the political agenda, and then economic and other means have to be used to put pressure on Israel to allow independent investigations and to give instructions to its military not to target journalists. These are not journalists that are just coming into the way of the shelling. These are deliberate killing of journalists in order to clear the path, stop the news, distort the news, and that has to end.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Nina and then Gabriela, and then we have a question online.
Okay, thank you. Nina Larson, AFP. Thanks for this briefing. First, for Ms. Albanese, thank you for doing this. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the complicity issue when it comes to the U.S. Secretary of State Rubio said today that the U.S. is showing unwavering support for Israel in its war as it continues in Gaza. And you also have, as has been mentioned here, the revoked visas, the sanctions against you and others. So, I mean, could you just say a little bit more about how complicit, I guess, you think that the U.S. is in what you're describing as a genocide? And then also, what do you think the consequences for the U.S. should be for this? And finally, I also had a question. I wanted to ask you how the sanctions have impacted you personally. And sorry, I have just one small question for Ms. Khan. I wanted to ask about, you compared the number of journalists killed in Gaza to a number of other conflicts. What was the conflict before this that had the most journalists killed? Could you provide some more figures on that? Thank you.
Okay. So I will have to encourage you to wait another couple of weeks regarding full answer to that question regarding complicity, because this is the topic of my next report to the General Assembly, which again, just to also go back to the first question, yes, I'm trying to go to the United States. Things look not particularly promising, but this is what I should be doing. There is one fact. The United States has been for decades backing Israel and Israeli government, various subsequent Israeli government, militarily, politically, diplomatically, strategically, discursively. And however, and this is also true for the previous administration, however, with the current administration, things have passed the Rubicon. In a sense, we are really in uncharted territory, in the sense that while the military and financial support is not new, what I find somewhat having passed that breaking point is the political cover for Israel, because there is also with the attacks in the region that target also a number of states that have been seen like considered allies of the United States. There is a possible acceptance that the alliance with Israel is worth the erosion of other ties. There is a risk in this. I mean, I don't understand why people don't see the danger, the extreme danger of what is happening right now. But going back to Palestine, what I find extremely concerning is the incitement, what has changed at the discursive level, because since February, I said, when the Trump administration, when President Trump evoked the image of the Gaza Riviera and hinting the Palestinians should leave, I would say this is the first time that U.S. endorses publicly, making it become a part of the U.S. foreign policy, the forced displacement of the Palestinians, in the sense clearly they didn't oppose it, but at the same time they never endorsed it to the point that it became U.S. policy, and this has become more evident, and I think it's wrong. It's wrong. It's legally wrong, morally wrong, and dangerous. The sanctions are unacceptable. The sanctions against me, of course, I am the first U.S. person to be sanctioned, and this must be removed. I mean, I urge the United Nations, like the Secretary General, the members of the General Assembly, don't let this become a precedent, because it's not going to be limited to me as it always happened. It's extremely serious because it violates in one stroke of a pen the UN Charter, the UN Convention on Privileges and Immunities, but it's totally retaliatory, and it doesn't only affect me. I keep on saying I have members of my own family, including my daughter, who are directly affected by these, and it's incredible the financial hurdle that this is causing to my family. Why do I have to pay with my own life? For what? For having done my job? So again, I don't like the personalization of what matters. This is why I'm saying what happens to me is now happening also to 9 judges and prosecutors of the International Criminal Court, and this should have created really such an uproar, but also Palestinian human rights organizations. So on the one hand, I expect the United Nations to stand firmly against this. On the other hand, I expect regional groups to stand firmly against it, because I'm European, I'm Italian. It's unbelievable that I have to suffer the weight of this vicious administrative move, even in my own country where I cannot open a bank account. So Europe should institute the European blocking statute to protect people who from this personal ad personam attacks from today is the United States, tomorrow can be another state. So, yeah.
You asked me about the numbers killed. Now, I can give you one example. Ukraine. In the war, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 14 journalists have been killed in Ukraine. 252, on the other hand, killed in Gaza, including dozens targeted. Probably in terms of numbers, the second highest would be Afghanistan, where, as you know, there was conflict for more than a decade. And during that time, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it was only in dozens killed over 2 decades. And again, you can see both in terms of time as well as in terms of numbers how outrageous are the casualties of journalists in Gaza.
Gabriela, and then Musa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have some questions. Gabriela Sotomayor, Mexico Proceso. Do you think that Mr. Netanyahu cares about the hostages? Because we were here talking with the mothers of some of them, and they say that they feel abandoned by Mr. Netanyahu in the case of the hostages. That is my first question. Then to Irene Khan, how is the situation of freedom of expression inside Israel, freedom of the press? Because I don't know if young people, women, do they know what Netanyahu is doing to the children in Gaza? Do they know? And then my last questions, My last question is on silence. That is complicit of what is happening. Is there a way to hold accountable a country that is not saying out loud what is happening and condemn it, like USA, for example? Is there a way to hold them accountable? And I think that's it.
Okay, of the many superpowers I have, this doesn't include reading people's minds, unfortunately. So I cannot tell you what ICC wanted Prime Minister Netanyahu has in mind. But however, I fully understand the sense of abandonment of the families of the hostages, because in fact it has proven true over the past years that the hostages could be all brought home through negotiation, brought home alive, without suffering, without enduring the bombing and the starvation. And of course, what has befallen Gaza could not spare the hostages. The moment you curtail the access to all kind of living necessities, this is what happens. You undermine the possibility of survival of your own hostages. So it seems to me that they've been treated as political pawns in this horrible last 2 years. And when I invoke the end of this of the horror in Gaza, of course, or not in Gaza, in the occupied Palestinian territory, of course I have in mind the millions of Palestinians who are trapped in the Gaza ghetto, but also the dozens of hostages who still remain there. And then, of course, my thought also goes to the thousands of Palestinians who are held hostages by an unlawful occupation in the West Bank, from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Another thing I wanted to say concerning what's happening right now, I have the feeling that we really struggle. I mean, there is a general tendency not to understand the totality of what's happened, the totality of the conduct, the totality of the crimes against the totality of the Palestinian people. And I thought to help both member states and others, including the media, get this overall sense with the report I presented to the General Assembly last year, Genocide as Colonial Erasure. There is a design that seems very much to have been pursued in the erasure of Palestinian life in Palestine. I understand that history requires time to be understood, but certain truths in this context are so stark that they demand recognition in the very moment they are told. And again, the very fact, I'm grateful to my colleague Irene Khan to share this important piece of analysis and say we are looking at the geolocations of each killing of journalists, and we say that there is a pattern. But I've seen it myself with a few investigations of the death of killing of journalists that has happened. I mean, it seems to be either in anticipation to an attack, so there can be no documentation, or retaliatory, as it happened in the case of Fatima Hassouna. Fatima Hassouna was supposed to be at Cannes for the screening of her documentary, and she was killed the night her documentary was announced as being at Cannes, with missiles that killed her and her family. So again, we tend to trivialize this genocide, because, as I said, behind each story, behind each killing, behind each starved person, there is a universe that, poof, has been pulverized. And we do not even have the time to recognize and mourn each of them, because this is the pace of our life and the pace of this genocide.
With relation to the situation in Israel, there is no country in the world, I believe, that can remain untouched when it conducts genocide and war, killing of journalists on its borders, can remain untouched within the country. And of course, freedom of expression inside Israel is also restricted by law. For example, there is heavy censorship of media and very little independent media. The owner of Haaretz, Al-Haaretz, which is probably the only independent print media still left, himself has talked about the kind of pressure that they come under from the authorities. But there are also mob attacks. There have been mob attacks against Israeli journalists if they report, if the people feel that they are reporting against what they see as Israeli interests, if they are reporting favorably sometimes on Palestinian issues. Last year, Israel adopted a Foreign Media Act, under which it has banned Al Jazeera, but that same Foreign Media Act, of course, also has a chilling effect on other foreign media present in Israel. They are not allowed to report on what is happening in Gaza. They can only report on what is happening inside Israel. So overall, there is a chilling effect, I think, on media freedom inside Israel that is damaging Israel's own media sector quite significantly.
Mr. Katrougalos is online. Did you have something to add?
Yes, I have a short comment on the question about the hostages. I think a clear indication, if not proof, of the fact that hostages are not a priority for Prime Minister Netanyahu is the recent attack against Qatar. It was the only open diplomatic channel for the release of the hostages. I understand that for this reason, understanding that the policies followed now by Israel are against even the long-term interests of this country, we see the appearance of a peace camp. Small now, but already including a former prime minister, several ministers, among them ministers of defense, former heads of Mossad and IDF. These are neither pro-Palestinian, nor, of course, against the state of Israel, but they realize the impasse, realize that genocide and the perpetuation of raw violence cannot resolve anything, and they understand that the only solution is return to the diplomatic solutions through the United Nations, which are not the house of darkness, as Prime Minister Netanyahu portrayed it during his speech at the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Musa, yes, and then Catherine, and then we have Ravi online.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Albanese. Avec l'attaque d'Israël contre les responsables palestiniens à Qatar, je suis là. Alors, avec les attaques israéliennes contre les responsables palestiniens à Qatar, on voit qu'Israël a franchi vraiment une nouvelle étape, et aussi en menaçant Qatar et autres pays, donc ces menaces de Benjamin Netanyahu et autres responsables israéliens, de renvoyer les Palestiniens autrement, avec une menace de faire plus ou moins la même chose. Donc, c'est ce qu'on comprend. Et aussi, ça fait 2 ans que vous et les différentes organisations des Nations Unies, la Cour internationale de la Haye, vous avez sorti des rapports, vous demandez tout le temps un cessez-le-feu. On voit les cessez-le-feu, on n'a pas de cessez-le-feu, mais au contraire, il y a un élargissement de crimes contre Gaza et contre les Palestiniens ailleurs. Est-ce que vous avez peur de ce qui va se passer, donc de cette nouvelle étape? Est-ce que vous avez peur de ce qui va se passer dans les semaines et mois à venir? Et aussi une petite question concernant ce qui se passe en Cisjordanie. On n'a pas parlé de la Cisjordanie. Merci beaucoup.
I think I did mention what's happening in the West Bank, but the thing is that what's happening in Gaza is so overwhelming and shocking and not acted upon as it should, that it tends to overtake the rest. But look, the situation in the West Bank is being consistently, day by day, daily, bad since I can remember. And in fact, together with other human rights experts, my predecessor and other human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israeli and Palestinian human rights organizations, everyone was raising the alarm that the West Bank was becoming a powder keg and it would explode because of the level of oppression, extrajudicial killings, the shoot-to-kill policy that had become evident from the soldiers even before October 7. I keep on remembering, I mean, the level of extrajudicial killings in the West Bank was not, I mean, there was not enough attention to this, but 460 Palestinians had been killed during the 6 months. I had been a mandate holder before October 8, before October 2023. And there is one thing that the United Nations in particular should have given more attention to, is the fact that this government coalition, as soon as it installed itself in February 2023, it signed an agreement for the annexation of the West Bank. Large swathes of the West Bank were immediately put under the control of the current finance minister of Israel. And since then, the advancement of the colonial project, being really taking the land and the resources and displacing the Palestinians, so settler colonial, has continued and has even accelerated after October 2023, with the result that now the Jordan Valley has been almost emptied of Palestinians. It was home to herders and the Bedouin communities, nomadic communities that have almost entirely left the areas. Those who remain are at serious risk because there are ideological, violent, armed settlers attacking them on a daily basis. And there are only few organizations, which I'm not going to name, in order to protect them. The majority, I mean, from a number point of view, there are dozens of Israelis, citizens going to the West Bank in sensitive areas, and some international organizations, but this is the only interposition presence between the soldiers, the settlers, and the Palestinians, who are at critical risk of forced displacement, of being killed, etc. And of course, the economy is collapsing. I do see, and this is why, and with this I will conclude, I do see that there is if we see the destruction of a people as such, through acts of killing, through acts of creation of conditions of life calculated to destroy, and infliction of severe bodily and mental harm, if we see the Palestinians as a whole, I do confirm what I said already 1 year ago, is that the genocide has already leaked out of the Gaza Strip. This is the reality. There is an attempt to destroy the Palestinian as such in what remains of the occupied Palestinian territory with various acts and means. Sorry, the first question. Sorry. No, it doesn't fall. I was not trying to evade this, but yes, because it doesn't really fall under my mandate. But how do I read it? Look, it's a violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar. It's very serious. This is not unprecedented, and with other special rapporteurs, I've denounced this continuous recourse to aggression under pretense of self-defense that Israel has invoked times and times against Lebanon, against Syria, against Iraq, against Yemen. And again, there might be a conflict-like situation in certain, but this is or Iran, the continuous bombing of neighboring countries is clearly a threat to peace, which should receive a more preventative response from the United Nations. What I fear, and again I I defer this to better analysts than me, but what I fear is that also when I look at the maps that Israel continues, some Israeli leaders continue to portray of Greater Israel, I say, I just wonder, and this is something for you journalists, I wonder if Greater Israel is not to be understood, not merely as a territorial project defined by border expansion, but as a project of domination sustained by primarily US, but also other West-centered interests, in which every alternative socio-political force is neutralized. And when still Qatar doesn't follow this pattern, I still don't understand exactly what was the logic behind it, because Qatar was not just another state that could pose a threat. This was the state who was offering its good offices to facilitate discussion toward peace and toward the release of hostages, and so it looks such a self goal in a way that I really don't know, but I'm very scared by what's happening in the region.
Thank you. We've run quite a bit over time, so if you have extra questions for the mandate holders, we are happy to pass them on. I'm just going to quickly go to somebody online who's been waiting a very long time. Ravi, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I am audible. The question is to Ms. Francesca Albanese, as well as Mr. George Katrougalos. Ms. Albanese, your report reveals so many disturbing facts about what is exactly happening. Firstly, about the figures, recently Guardian put out a figure of 200,000 being killed. That was a report based on Israeli former IDF chief. Your figure right now suggests some 380 or 680. Of course, this is not an established figure. This is according to several academics or several analysts. Where do you put this figure? The second question is on the moral erosion of, responsibilities for countries which are signatories to the genocide treaty convention. I'm asking this question in the context of India. For example, India has been having fairly strong relations with Israel, to the extent that the Israeli finance minister recently visited New Delhi to sign a new bilateral free trade agreement. How would you characterize India's position on this? At one hand, it is a signatory to the Genocide Convention. At another hand, on the other side, it seems to be violating the Genocide Convention. Is that your assessment as well? This question is to George Katrougalos. You talked of Shlomo Sand, a historian in the past I used to respect. But what did he exactly say? I could not really understand what you had said.
Again, I repeat what I said before, that the figures we tend to rely, I was very clear to say the figures I continue to rely upon are around 65,000 people killed in Gaza, and these are the figures that come from various sources, but all corroborated, verified by the UN country team on the ground. And at the same time, I was saying that I'm worried because it continues to come up, and this comes from scientists, that it comes from medical experts who have been operating in other conflict, and people who have access to to Israeli sources that refer to figures that can go from 300,000 to 600,000. And again, this is scary. It's scary, not because 60,000 is a number that doesn't scare me, but again, there is just also this confusion heightened the urge for this to stop, because There are so many incidents that are apparent. There is this figure that keeps on going around, and unfortunately it's true. There is a classroom of children killed every day in a day that is good, is normal, and is quiet in Gaza. This is the reality. I don't know what else is to be said, but it's very likely that the figures are much higher than what the United Nations are able to verify. First of all, as I said, there is even the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is the one who has always steadily since 2007 provided the figures of the casualties in Gaza, doesn't have the capacity to verify beyond what comes through the hospitals, and also because there are other figures that are not reported. Those who die because of access to medical services, those who die for hunger because of hunger and are not in reach to a hospital or other means of verification. So of course the numbers are lower than what is circulated. And also think of how many Palestinians have been killed, over 1,200, 1,300. I really struggle to continue to count because it's horrible, while trying to access food. That sometimes I say they are killing more than they are properly providing meals to. And does it matter? Isn't it enough in any case to stop this?
Mr. Katrougalos, do you want to take the question directed at you?
Many thanks. My point that I was trying also to elaborate in my first response is that now there is an opposition to the continuation of the war, the genocide in Gaza, by an important number of Israeli figures, not just progressive Jews. We have seen how progressive Jews in America, in Europe, have participated in the massive demonstrations in support of the Palestinian people and against the crimes committed in the West Bank and in Gaza. We see, however, in addition to that, in recent months, the reappearance in Israel of a camp of peace. The people who participate in this camp are not homogeneous. I don't have personally a commonality of ideas with most of them. They're patriots. They care about their own country, Israel. But they see the impasse, and they see also the moral hazard of the continuation of the war in Gaza, genocide, not just a war. And my point is that if we are trying to have a mobilization of all forces of the public opinion that we can mobilize, we must also take into account this emerging camp of peace in Israel. I repeat, without agreeing on all issues with them, but agreeing on this one capital issue, that the genocide must end and that the only possible solution is diplomatic.
Thank you, Mr. Katrougalos. I think we will close this press conference. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you to the experts online and here who have taken part. Have a good evening, and send us any questions you want passed on, and we're happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.